Good evening, everypony, and welcome to Commentary's Magic Stream on today's Sunday, January 30th, 2022. I am, as always, Grandpaws.
Big cheese.
Arquette, and Ivory is not feeling great today, so he's gonna sit this one out.
We wish him a swift and full recovery from the booster.
Use the boost.
Use the boost to get through.
Can't do a barrel roll, though. Don't have any barrels.
On that related tangent, Magic has a new set that's coming out, and there is an artifact pilot fox creature, and the entire reveal for this has been nothing but barrel roll memes. It's pretty good.
I see.
But we're not talking about Magic today. We're talking about friendship, which is Magic, and that's different.
It's the magic of friendship.
Yes. Specifically, we're talking about a topic that we've touched on briefly before, but more from like a really broad point of view. And we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of something that many players have questions about, and even experienced players sometimes still have difficulty communicating or formulating an exact strategy for, and that is sideboarding.
This being our second stream, it's Sideboards Reloaded. When we do the inevitable third stream, Sideboards Revolutions. We don't talk about that one.
You just talked about it, though. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive into a particular aspect of sideboarding here at the beginning, probably the best place to start, which is talking about silver bullet cards. This term gets thrown around quite a bit, and people might ask, what are silver bullets? Well, silver bullets are cards that are designed to attack or counter very specific different strategies or card types. For example, silver bullet cards could include resource or troublemaker removal, problem replacement, various forms of friend disruption, anti-farm tools like Meadowbrook's Mask, anti-combo tools like EEA Council, which can also be a combo tool in and of itself. Basically, it's something that has a very specific purpose in mind that you're going to want in certain matchups. Silver bullet cards are most useful as sideboard options in decks that already have a strong matchup against one or more particular deck types or play strategies. And these decks want to expand their options for different matchups without dramatically rebuilding. We kind of talk about the, rock, paper, scissors balance that exists within the meta, where certain archetypes have a tendency to do well against certain other archetypes. Control has a tendency to do pretty well against farm, aggro has a tendency to do pretty well against control, farm has a tendency to do pretty well against aggro, so on and so forth. And while you definitely still want to leverage that strength, you're not always going to play your favorable matchup. Sometimes you're going to face a deck where you may be at a disadvantage, and you want to have some tool you can rely on that will help you in these cases.
Would tilt the odds a little bit more in your favor.
Right. In these cases, it can be helpful to add 4 or 5 sideboard silver bullets early in the deck building process, so you don't find yourself having to cut essential cards to make room later on. So if you know that you're going to be building an aggro deck, and you're going to want something that will help you against combo, you may want to choose, while you are building your deck list, to add those anti-combo cards early at the beginning so that you don't find yourself having to cut a card that is or has become a key part of your deck's play strategy. So every new set that is introduced is not only going to add additional complexity to the broader metagame, because the card pool is larger and the number of options for decks is larger, but it's also going to add additional options for silver bullet cards. Again, for the same reasons. Fond Memories has been out for a couple of months now, but is still relatively new. What has this done to the meta overall as far as silver bullets are concerned, Cheese?
So we have a few new things that have changed due to FM. Sucks.
I think Cheese is having fun with the
That dog came right over right when I started talking.
Yeah, but attention.
So resources are now a lot more relevant due to Handy. You can get multiple uses out of them. And so it can be important or to attack answers to them. Like, it's always been kind of important, but it's getting more important. And another big thing is Love Vampire, or what's her actual name? The
Love
Chrissy
Vampire.
card? That's her subtitle. So it's just Queen Crystal's Love Vampire? Okay. Yeah, and so it's less of a sideboard concern, but more of a color agility thing, where these cards that give you lots of different options for color generally give it to a friend. And
Doggo.
Oh my god, stop. And yes, and so there are decks that if like Queen Chrissy drops turn 2, then you're never gonna have entry for the rest of the game, and like unless you have some way to get around it. Now we also have some new options for actual sideboard cards in FM. So some examples here are on shuffle. So this helps against hand disruption and the still partying combo and some other stuff like that, where it can help reset the deck. Nightmare Moon versus Control, or things like that have a very large hand, like having Blast, where like cutting your opponent's hand size down by half can be pretty impactful, especially with these kinds of decks. Terrified Scream versus the Traitor, otherwise known as Thorax, or other cards' friends that get huge or really mess with the face-off by being involved. So, for example, like Novo or Spike. Just kick them out on the face-off. Like, Farm in general doesn't like this. Fit a Peak is an interesting one for against like Reanimator or anything that's looking at its discard pile. If you can hit critical cards, and it's free to play, I want to get it back if you actually need to hit multiple cards. Focus Attention for handling troublemakers or farm heavy decks. Smile to deal with an annoying problem. Flurry Heart and Property Damage for additional resource disruption options. They kind of work differently, pretty differently actually. At least Property Damage can eventually deal with Desert Red. And Princess Combo Meal to counteract Handy. And if you're an orange, you're probably running 3 of these anyway.
But if you're sitting there looking at Princess Combo Meal and are like, maybe I only want 2 of those, might be worth including a 3rd copy in your sideboard.
Definitely effective against some decks.
Mm-hmm. Even without some of the synergies that are present, it can still be a useful tool to have. Yeah, I'll hit a Daybreaker with that any day.
That is fair enough, because that's a little bit of a power swing there. Now, I want to explore something I just said. I believe the exact word I used was include in your sideboard. And I have a question for you. More of a rhetorical question, or a philosophical question. Which is why the textbook's going to cost $400 and be about as thick as a pencil. It's standard fare for philosophy. The question is, are you building 45 card decks with sideboards, or are you actually building 50 card decks? And I think the second is more likely than you think, and the difference between these two is a fundamental difference in deck building perspective. If you make 45 card decks and then ask a question along the lines of, so, what 5 silver bullets do I want to improve my odds against the meta that I will be playing in? And you think through those in advance, then you're going to have some canned options that can greatly simplify sideboarding during the tournament, since you've already, thought those out. And have some ideas about what the best strategy is. You are swapping cards out of your deck, not removing them. Going down this route, however, does mean that you do have to make some very tough decisions to get down to 45 cards, and 5 cards isn't a lot to work with to answer the entire meta. Plus, if you run into a rogue deck that has never been seen before, you're going to need to think on your feet anyway. Probably should have said hooves there, huh?
What are hands?
I don't know. Lyra keeps talking about them. A 50 card deck, however, is more about knowing what your deck wants to do and having built-in answers to whatever you think you're going to run into anyway in those 50 cards. Then, figuring out which 5 cards you don't need in any given matchup. Which of these cards do you not want to see against this opponent, or would slow you down, or would dilute the most powerful cards in your deck? Nobody really ever wants to run Winterzilla, but if you gotta answer resources, well, that may be one of your only options. And do you really want to draw that? I don't know. Now, if you go this way, you have to think about what you want to remove during the start of every game, since each opponent might be running something different, and sometimes you may not know what to remove, or you may not be able to remove anything because your deck actually needs all 50 cards to work. They're just two different ways to look at the same thing. And I think it's worth considering both options, because sometimes you'll get different answers out of building a 45 card deck and then adding silver bullets, maybe even at the beginning, as Grandpa suggested, versus building a 50 card deck and then figuring out which things you don't want.
Expanding on that, do you think it is still a good idea for players who are choosing to approach deck building with the 50 card deck philosophy in mind to still try to broaden their deck's answers? Or do you think that they should build their deck to be more redundant at what its primary goal is, to increase its consistency in that regard, despite the fact that you're running more cards in the deck?
That one, I think, is something of a personal choice. I think that regardless of how many cards you have in your deck, you have to fulfill the same basic principles. You have to pack answers to what you're going to run into. You have to make sure that you can execute your strategy. Yes, it's easier to do that in 50 cards. But
that's 5 more cards you might have to draw through if you're not removing things.
Yes. I don't have the math offhand for what that does to your odds of seeing any particular card in your opening hand, but it's gonna be something on the order of about 4%, just based on a approximation that I recall from back in the day. That's not a lot, but it is something.
Something.
Yep, it's about 4%.
It matters. It really does.
Okay, so now that we've discussed some of the background and maybe some deeper philosophy of sideboarding, let's take a look at something a little bit more specific, maybe.
Yeah, I believe we had some people in Discord that asked for somewhat of a meta overview. Cheese, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we had some questions about like which kind of decks are you going to care about, like what's running resources, what colors tend to occur together, and things like that. And this is kind of tricky to answer because any advice we give you now is unlikely to be applicable later on. Metas change, so it also isn't going to be relevant in previous metas like Adventure or Old Core or anything like that. And so decks generally either run few enough resources that the standard 2 to 3 removal tools are enough, or sufficient quantities of resources that you'll not be able to address them all anyway. Yellow and orange are the most likely to spam resources at the moment in core. In older metas, white may spam resources too. So we're going to go and look at some actual openers and say, what does this opener imply? So an opener being like a main and a problem. And then what kind of things should you keep or get rid of against that specific opening? And this is going to be with the current meta. So, but it is going to be still useful as like general guidance.
Sure. Let's take a look at our first opener here.
Prismlight says in chat, all you get is a main and a problem to try and guess what the opponent does. It's not enough information. Any main can do up to 5 different things. I mean, that's true to a point, but there's a difference between a main and a deck being capable of playing any of 5 archetypes and being good or popular at playing any of those 5 archetypes.
Yeah, there was a discussion when we were talking about this of like there are mains where it's like, yeah, Stunning Wonder can play control, but do you or farm or something like that, but do you really care if they are? Like the main does nothing to help the game strategy.
Right. So in these cases that we're going to be looking at here, which at this particular snapshot in time should be somewhat accurate, we're focusing on what this main and problem combination has shown to be best at doing. And if your opponent has chosen to do something rogue with that, then either they got you, and good on them for having the element of surprise, or they are playing a weaker version of that deck and your sideboarding will be less relevant.
There is a bit that we were intending on talking about a little bit later, which is how do you counter what your opponent's doing with sideboards, and what Grandpa's has just said here touches on some of those main points. But we can get into more detail about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about this first one. So we have Fluttershy, Stunning Wonder, and Buckball strategy. And so Stunning Wonder is the one where you play when a first time your problem enters play each turn, gain an AT and draw a card on her flip side. So this should be aggro, but what kind may be unclear. There's yellow-blue, yellow-white, changelings. troublemaker removal can come right out. Resource removal tends to be less valuable. You could cut 1 or 2 depending on how many you have. But like friend disruption, so mass removal or immediate, is very desirable against Fluttershy. So Fluttershy is going to try and push for a very early face-off to get flipped. And troublemakers can buy you time here if you get them out early enough. And yellow has good ways of breaking through them, but it may take time to actually get them or to build up the resources they need to actually do it. Also, making them burn a Sanctuary Construction before the main is even flipped is a great denial of total resources over the game.
Right. Every dilemma that they play that isn't getting them a card and a token
is
real valuable.
Not getting them a card and a token, yeah.
That
has
pretty close to 280. So, and odds are you're not going to need troublemaker removal here. Your opponent's definitely going to play dilemmas. And so depending on what your dilemmas are doing in your deck, if you're just trying to if you just have them to break through troublemakers or something, then you likely won't need them. There are other reasons, like if you're running your own Stunning Wonder, then you probably want to keep your troublemaker, or not troublemaker, sorry, your dilemmas. But just be aware of the purpose of them. And looking at the resources that Stunning Wonder normally runs, or if we're thinking about like Stunning Wonder Blue, you'll see like Rocket Scooter and Dilemmas, and maybe Entry. I don't think she normally does.
I think she's transitioned over with the new blue 3-entry card to just running friends for entry now.
Yeah. So you can't remove dilemmas with resource removal, and you don't want to, the vast majority of the time, you don't want to remove Rocket Scooter. So, and sometimes they will run Stick, but I think that's pretty uncommon.
Yeah, you see Stick a lot more with Nurturing Nature.
Yes, definitely.
It works better with her playstyle.
So much, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview of what this setup would do.
Okay, let's take a look at a different one.
Here's a site to put the fear in any aggro player.
Oh, you're telling me. So now our opponent has revealed Tempest Shadow Storm Commander and Royal Breakfast as their starting problem. From this, there's a few things you can expect. Number one, at some point in the game, Tempest is going to play a Grubber. Maybe it's the first thing that she flips into to find. Maybe she flips into a Grogar to banish and find the Grubber that way, so Grogar can come back later, or maybe Grubber just gets played later in the game. Regardless, anytime she shows up, your hand is not safe. So if you had any form of hand protection, Pinky Sense, Fires of Friendship, if you're playing back in older formats, Element of Honesty, things along those lines, keep them in. They're going to be useful. Otherwise, Royal Breakfast alone as a starting problem implies a slower deck. You're going to be looking at control. So you should be considering things that are going to counteract troublemakers and obnoxious friends. That's a fancy way of
bodyguards.
Bodyguards is a good one. A bunch of AT generators, especially like the Zakora. Twilight and Rarity Exposed. All kinds of stuff. You'll definitely want to keep all of your entry in this case, because, as Cheese has pointed out in the past, one of Control's primary strategies is to play color denial and try and keep you off your secondary or tertiary colors. You'll also want to keep any cards that are going to help you get ahead early. when you are playing in a Swiss round against Control, more often than not, you are not going to be playing to 15 points. You are going to be playing to the end of time, and there is no difference between you being ahead by 9 points and you being ahead by 1 point at the end of time. So, point acceleration that is only just efficient or doesn't really help you, by being hasty or by putting power into play at two different locations or anything along those lines, is going to be less valuable than, say, a Fluttershy Pony Pirate that is efficient and can help you break through troublemakers early. Now, since Control, especially Tempest Control, can go so many different directions, you might consider going from a couple 3-ofs in your deck to 2-ofs on several different cards rather than removing all your copies of any one card, because every style of Control is going to play differently. But even though we don't know what secondary color, if any, Tempest might be playing, there's a few trends that we can see. Purple doesn't tend to run a lot of resources. Tempest has a tendency to run a couple copies of Stick and maybe some color entry resources, but that's usually about it. So you can probably drop one piece of resource removal. As previously discussed, if you have a card that is sheer point acceleration and is not helping you get those points in the first place, so we're talking one a bet, we're talking Night Glider overpowering, things along those lines, you can probably side out a copy or two of those. And something else to keep in mind is, especially with some of the adjustments that have been made to older formats like Adventure and just card design philosophy in newer sets, Control has a tendency to play more expensive, higher power friends. So if you have cards that are only going to disrupt small friends, you might consider taking out a copy or two. At the end of the day, I would suggest that you not completely cut yourself off of any kind of sideboard tech or tool if you can, and instead just cherry pick here and there to reduce total copies of something that you're already pretty heavy in, as long as that thing is not troublemaker removal or dilemmas or things like that. Something else that's kind of interesting about troublemakers is your gut instinct might be, if I'm playing against TM Control or if I'm playing against Farm, I want to side out as many of my own troublemakers as possible, right? Because they're already going to be playing Troublemaker.
Maybe. I've yet to see one outsmart Epic.
Right. Non-epics can definitely be a liability. Even good ones, like Sirens or Maniac or, what have you. But Grogar and Legion of Doom are going to be some of your best options against Farm and against some control decks if you can protect them or use them efficiently. If you can get out a Legion of Doom, it's going to stop your opponent from being able to uncover troublemakers there, and it's going to slowly give you incremental advantage. And Grogar is a great way of being able to get rid of an opponent's epic that is in play by banishing one of your other troublemakers that's already in play. So those two should probably stay in. Okay, that was a hard one. How about an easy one?
Sure. Let's see it.
Okay, Cheese.
It's so small.
You and I are playing, and I reveal Student 6 and Infiltrating the Hive. What am I playing?
Reanimator.
Yeah. How confident are you?
100%. I mean, particularly if it's you. There are other players who I'd be like, maybe this is something weird.
Yeah, this opening is sitting here screaming Reanimator and Big Friends.
So how are we going to deal with Reanimator? What type of removal or disruption do we want?
All of it. Stuff that doesn't hit small stuff.
Sure. And above all, we're going to prefer banishment. Dismissal is going to be less relevant because it's probably just going to end up coming back. Alternatively, if all we have is dismissal, we might want to try and run some discard pile hate or other cards like Somnambulist Blindfold. Resource removal can still be relevant to get rid of entry or things like parachutes that are already in play. Apart from infiltrating indicating that the opponent is going to care about the discard pile, we also know that they're playing Student 6, and we know that confronting is going to fuel Student 6. If we're playing an aggro deck or a mid-range deck, we might not be able to do anything to stop our own strategy because we still have to score points and win the game. But if we have tools that can stop the opponent from confronting, or if we have ways to get points other than confronting, those become a lot more interesting.
Sometimes that might even be making your confronts be more valuable. Instead of going for a point every turn, you go for a DFO every few.
Right. And as Cheese pointed out, answers to small friends are probably not as useful here. Frightens in particular are probably not great, as this deck has a tendency to run Twilight. Although it is worth considering one circumstance where a Frighten on small friends is very valuable, and that is if you have a blue main that is able to flip very early, like Seleno, and you can run Stop Fighting, which is a great tool to frighten the Changeling token that they put into play before they take another action.
Yeah, that can be huge.
That's some bad mannering. That costs 2 cards and 2 tokens for them.
Now, if blue is your secondary color, that can be much harder because Stop Fighting is 3 requirement. So you're going to have to get one of the new 3-power blue friends into play, or you're going to have to get multiple blue friends into play, and you have to have Stop Fighting. That can be really rough. But if you've got a means of flipping early, and you're not worried about having the rec to be able to play that, and you think you can play it consistently turn 2, yeah, I would leave those in that case.
Probably worth it.
Okay, Ara, how about you? Let's get another one.
See, I don't think that was easy enough. Let's look at one that's like dead simple. All right. So what you're going to do here is side in Waifu Stealer, take their main, and then rip it in half.
I think you get disqualified for that.
That's
Pretty sure you do.
That's what the card said to do, though. No, this is farm. And I don't even care what the main is here. Anything that's opening with playtime's over, you better expect trouble out of. Whether or not it's double, who knows. Now, playtime's over can be used for reasons other than just running a farm main, like flipping Bubbly Mare. But since the opponent has decided that their main getting flipped is so important that they were willing to give up Buckball, they were willing to give up Trading Traditions, they were willing to give up a second chance, all of these other potential options for getting their main flipped pretty consistently on turn 2 or so.
Well,
whatever they're doing with their main, that's their deck strategy. And their main alone should give you a massive, massive hint as to what's going on here. Now, you're going to be dealing with troublemakers in any case, since there is a minimum quantity of them needed to make this strategy viable, so your opponent's strategy is going to involve them somehow. So keep your options for dealing with troublemakers. Keep your problem replacements, your dilemmas, etc. What you shouldn't remove when you're looking at this is going to be highly dependent upon the main character that they're opened. As stated previously, the main dictates the strategy. Now, given the trader, single target removal probably not so good, because while that deck does carry a handful of friends that are pretty powerful on their own, the main threat's going to be the traitor themselves. As a corollary to that, answers to very large friends are probably not going to be very relevant, because the trader really wants lots of small friends rather than a few big ones. So mass removal is good. Things like Kool-Aid Yak, probably not so much.
There is one card I can think of that might be an exception in this case, and is, again, kind of in line with that philosophy of maybe don't remove every single option you have for dealing with things. And it's new to New Dawn, or new to Fond Memories, and that is Birds of a Feather.
That is fair.
I could expect Thorax Farm might have Birds of a Feather as its highest cost, highest impact friend by itself.
Right. Although I think I'd argue that Birds of a Feather is a bit of a win more card. So it's one of those things that you really need to address very quickly after it shows up. So I didn't say, like, take all of your single target removal out and remove everything that works on friends greater than 2 power. But it's likely to be running lots of little small things. So these are not hard and fast rules, and of course a player can adjust decks to fit their strategy, even if it's something that's maybe a little bit unexpected for that combination of colors and main. Now,
Okay.
let's... Oh, go for it.
I was going to say, we got a couple examples now. Do we want to go back to big picture and talk about, like, broad sideboarding strategies or mindsets to have?
Sure. All right, so here's my hill.
This is your hill?
This is my hill. There are many like it, but this one is mine, although I'm willing to share.
I'm not going to share your hill, but you go ahead.
This is understandable. So my philosophy here is bland sideboarding, sometimes just don't. I think that sideboarding wrong is way worse than diluting your deck with cards that maybe you don't want to see. Yes, it feels bad to have a card that you draw on your second turn that you're just looking at going, well, that doesn't seem real useful right now. Maybe it'll be useful later, but that's really not what you wanted to see right now. That's way worse than sitting there on turn 5 or 6 and just being like, I've made a horrible mistake by taking pieces of resource removal out. I've made a horrible mistake.
There's a desert road in play.
There's a desert
and
road.
Your only resource removal is Babby.
And I am sad as a result of the situation.
I have been there.
You probably should have thought about that when you saw Grubbermane.
Yeah. Now, if you look at an opening and you just don't know, or you have low confidence that what you're looking at is going to go down any particular line of play, or maybe the meta or environment is so new that you just legit don't know, run a 50-card deck. Now, if you're building 45-card decks, and you know that your 45-card deck is where you want it to start, and your 5 cards are better answers to things if you think that you'll run into them, you don't even suffer from this decision. You run your 45-card deck, you don't have dilution issues, and your deck, hopefully, has all the answers it needs.
I mean, I've definitely sideboarded out 3 cards and run a 47-card deck.
True. You don't need to sideboard all 5 in or out.
But that is definitely a consequence of I forget the name of the deck right now, but being a 50-card deck, not a 45-card deck.
Right. It's very easy to fall into that trap. I have found myself doing it more and more ever since the sideboard rule was introduced.
Yeah, well, it's like, oh, I'm at 45 cards. I can add 5 more. What else do I want? It's like,
It gives me more options, and I don't have to make ugly decisions about, do I go down to a 2 of here?
Oh wait, now I have to make even worse ugly decisions.
Yeah,
under pressure.
you're foreselling judgment here. So,
Because your opponent was late to the match, and you have like 5 seconds until the round starts.
yeah. But that's the bland option. Let's talk about the spicy option. What do you think here, JP?
Well, the spicy option is going to be, instead of just removing nothing or removing fewer than 5 cards, now you're removing things that might cause people to raise their eyebrows at you, or Applejack at least. We're talking about taking out all your resource removal, taking out all your methods of getting around troublemakers. Let's get spicier. How about removing pieces of your color entry from your deck?
I've definitely done that. It's like I think it's going to be a slower game. I've done that.
Well, tell us about that. So, if you are going to be making risky sideboard decisions like that, what might cause you to do that, and what situations is that good to do and bad to do?
If you think you need all of your other cards, but you think that you can, like, if you're running 9 entry, you can afford to get, like, to side 1, like, definitely 1 out, maybe 2, especially if, like, the opponent doesn't, either if your entry is like resource based or friend based, and you know that the opponent can't deal very well with whichever way you removed that your entry was, then it can be fine to remove if it's going to be a longer game. I find that against aggro, I basically never want to remove entry as another aggro or even mid range deck, because you can't get behind.
All right, but if you're a control deck and your main strategy here is already to slow the opponent down and mess them up, you can rely on what else is in your deck and say, I'm willing to give up a piece of entry or 2.
Yeah, like if it's yellow, where like, oh, you bounced my entry to my hand. I mean, that sucks, but like, I still have the entry.
Or I'm playing against Having a Blast with Party Science as their starter. Assuming they're not running Mysterious Disappearance, they're probably running Winterzilla, and that means I have 2 full turns from the time I play my resource until my opponent can answer it.
Yeah.
And you may even be able to do something about the probable Winterzilla before it flips up.
Yeah. This gets even greedier when you go back into older formats, when entry gets even better. Like when you start talking about resource-based entry that can protect itself, like Singing Barrel or Trading Traditions, and your opponent doesn't have an easy way of DFOing away your Trading Traditions early. I've dropped color entry down to like 5 pieces before, maybe even slightly less.
That's pretty spicy.
Really is.
Needless to say, if you do something like that, you better be real confident in your calls being correct.
I mean, in those cases, I was either playing a main that was going to flip early with lots of friends that I could play to, maintain my off color, or I was playing Changeling Pretender.
Yeah.
And I knew my opponent had to flip their main in order to have a chance at playing the game. Like, I'm playing against Bluna. My main is Changeling Pretender. I'm probably taking 2 pieces of color entry out.
Simply because if your opponent doesn't flip their Bluna, their entire deck strategy just kind of falls apart.
Correct. So that's bland sideboarding and spicier sideboarding. We talked about deck building philosophy. We talked about some examples of metas. Now,
That's not meta enough for me.
You want to go meta?
I want to go meta. Let's talk about screwing with your opponent with their sideboarding choices. How do you counter sideboarding? Well, the element of surprise is a perennial favorite. However, it is difficult to pull this off in really the current state of the world, because there aren't a lot of little local metas. There's kind of just the one big global meta. And the little local metas served a very important purpose, which was you could go and test something in your smaller group before unloading it upon the world at a convention. And not gonna lie, it's really, really hard to come up with a tier 1 deck with no testing. Now, that being said, if you can come up with something that doesn't currently exist in the meta, you have a good chance at blindsiding the entire field. Now, the other fun thing
with a blindfold.
I see what you did there. Now, the other fun thing you can do here is you can send false signals to your opponents and cause them to incorrectly sideboard. So, those openings that we just talked about, where maybe you'd look at those and say, I see we've got a Tempest with a Royal Breakfast. I'm definitely dealing with control here. And so they'll make appropriate choices to deal with control. And then it turns out you're actually playing some kind of weird purple aggro thing.
Does it have Moondancer in it?
Yes.
Of course it does.
Moondancer's an aggro card. They're probably not going to be too happy about their sideboard choices. Now, you do have to build this into the foundation of your deck, because it consists of the main and the starting problem, which does have some opportunity costs, not just in terms of what you can't have in your deck because you had to swap something out for, say, a different starting problem. But it also comes with some costs of now you have to deal with that starting problem. As an aggro deck, Royal Breakfast is not really what you want to be opening with, so you're going to need a plan to deal with that. But if you cause somebody to sideboard poorly in a best of one environment, that might be worth it.
I specifically remember a game I played against Animoy just a few weeks ago, where he opened with having a blast, and I'm pretty sure Party Science was his starting problem. So my thought...
It's pink, like, mid-range-ish, right? Right?
Like mid-range or combo. Like, we've seen the mono-pink still partying deck quite a bit. The Stoic Brothers really popularized that. Bugle did a lot of work with that as well. So, yeah, it's probably that. I'm going to sideboard out problem or like Troublemaker hate and probably some resource removal as well.
All
Bam!
Right.
It's pink-white control with nothing but Troublemakers and like Saddle Rose Storefronts.
Did you have a bad time?
I had a very bad time for the first half of that game. I did eventually draw the one piece that I left in the deck, again, abiding by that previous philosophy of if you really don't know, don't completely cut off your option. But it could have been so much easier
if you left all those in because you knew what you were looking at.
Right.
Yeah.
So it works. You can get people, and if you get them, you'll get them good.
Would you say that you've been gottomed?
I was gottomed for sure.
Nice.
Yeah. Do we have any questions from chat about sideboarding strategies, advice, anything that we've touched on today before we kind of wrap things up? It's been a lot to digest, and it's a good thing that this video will be available on our YouTube channel as well, so you can watch it anytime you need a refresher.
You can come back in a year and be like, wow, all those metas, what are they talking about? It's orange aggro now.
We can sit there and be like, boy, were we wrong.
Right, no resource removal against Fluttershy Blue? Pfft. What were we thinking?
But that just reinforces one of the points we made pretty early on. These are inherently a point-in-time thing about the current state of the meta. It will change, it will evolve. The best way to be aware of that is to keep an eye on tournament reports, on what people are playing during things like Coco, like online cons, and to participate in the casual scene as people just ask for pickup games. Just see what's out there. Now, yes, that is a bit of a commitment, but most of that information, especially the tournament reports, is just out there for whenever you want to read it.
Just within the last few weeks, there have been numerous new decks that have been developed by several players in the Discord channel, and even though these games have been held against one or two opponents, there's been discussion and sharing of the deck lists afterwards as well. You can literally watch the meta unfolding right before your eyes if you are paying attention. And if you don't feel like watching and you feel like moving or shaking, you can certainly do that too.
Oh,
We've seen it.
There's a main that you could flip with
Mover and shaker
over.
with playtime's over. Yeah.
Oh, that's just rude. That's highly rude.
I'm just gonna flip Bubbly Mare.
I mean, yeah, we're going back to Harmony, so like rudeness is kind of inherent. So.
Well, it doesn't seem like we have any questions right now, and that's fine. So that will about wrap up our discussion on this topic for today. We would like to give a big shout out to all of our patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for your regular support. If you aren't currently a patron and you enjoy what we do, please consider donating. Doing so does enable us to continue making content like this and lets you earn some great perks as a bonus. If you have comments or questions you'd like to send our way, feel free to reach out to us through Facebook, Twitter, or email. If you're a patron, you can also chat live with us on Slack any day, anytime. I can confirm this. I went to bed before Ara went to bed. I woke up and Ara was still awake.
Guilty.
You may not be able to chat with all of us. You can chat with him. Send him pictures of Thorax at 4 a.m.
No, do not do this thing. Do not do this thing. Like you're also expecting coherency out of me, which I think you can also firsthand confirm that I was not exactly coherent.
Correct. Finally, if you're looking to watch any of our previous videos, including tournament recordings, you can find them on our YouTube channel linked just below the stream. With all that said, thank you to each and every one of our viewers, both here now and watching this recording later. We are, as always, Commentary is Magic. I am, as always, Grand Paws.
Big cheese.
Arcat and Ivory is hopefully getting some rest and feeling better.
And we'll see you all in a couple weeks. Keep an eye on the Reddit for ADCO announcement, and anyway, come to BabsCon.
Something like that. Oh yeah, I do need to get the ADCO announcement up. So yeah, keep an eye out for those.
Bye.
Bye.